good to learn. So without much further ado, and again, I want to thank Ladress for the great breakfast. Again, another business client, Marina, thank you for your partnership. Ladress is fantastic, right by Bryant Park, as you can see, and that's just a small sampling of their menu. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the man of the hour, Vladimir Gerasichev, from Business Relations.
I know that it's really hard to pronounce, and the other thing that I know that no matter how long you speak in front of the audience, every time I walk here, I have this feeling. I don't know what about you, but every time I start something, you know, you have to really turn on yourself and then you're fine, but in the beginning it's always like that. So I once had a guy who told me that when you will lose this feeling, you gotta quit this job and start another job. So first of all, I want to thank you all for being here and spending your morning with us. I hope that breakfast didn't disappoint you. I mean, it's really, the guys are really good, so they woke up really early today, and that tells us about their attitude. So I want to start with a personal story. I actually shared this story only once, but I decided that it would be a good analogy for what I'm about to talk now. It was actually more than 30 years ago. It was the late 80s. I was serving in the Soviet Union Army. Back then it was still the Soviet Union. I was in artillery division, and I was at the command. I was the sergeant for the artillery unit. And we did some shooting practice. Just for you to imagine what's a shooting practice. Peaceful day, everything is like, you know, peaceful time, but still this is a huge artillery weapon. I mean, it's a huge one, and it got the missile of a 100-pound weight that is shooting like 10 miles ahead, and you never see where it hits because there's an observatory point, and they correct the shooting from there, so you only shoot. So we had two cannons at that time, and the cannons were pretty old. They came from the World War II, but they were still good for practice. So, you know, the end of Soviet Union, so, you know, and for 19 years old, for me at that time, I was a young sergeant, it was a huge experience. So I have to tell you that we had two commanders. One of them was a complete nightmare. I mean, really a nightmare. He was the guy who was always righteous, he was making us wrong. He was making us miserable. He was always screaming. He was, you know, the kind of major, the kind of commander you don't want to have. He was always speaking out on us. He was trying to make us feel guilt and all that. And the second one was the complete opposite of the first one. He was polite. He was intelligent. He never raised his voice. He was really a great guy, great partner. He respected us, the soldiers and the sergeants, so a great guy to be around. But the bad news was that the command was the first one at that day. He was commanding the shootings. So we couldn't hit the target. We were shooting, and we were doing parallel shooting, so two cannons were shooting at the same time. And at some point, I realized what was going on. But the worse it got, you know, the louder the guy was on the radio who was screaming at us and pushing and pressing and resisting and all that. So at some point I did realize that, you know, the missiles that were flying, and you can actually see them, they're like two black spots that are flying away from you. So the trajectory of one of them crossed the trajectory of another, so they were shooting like that. Instead of shooting like this, like, you know, parallel, they were shooting the right one was hitting left and the left one was hitting right. And there in 10 miles, nobody realized that it was the other way around. So if you can, you know, only imagine how terrible it should be when you realize something like that and you can't tell about that. You know, you just can't say honestly that this is what's going on. I think this is a very good analogy of often things that are going on in our organization. In our organizations, you know, sometimes things don't fly in the right trajectory, or they don't, sometimes they even fly in a different trajectory or even a different direction. But you don't know about that. Why? Because people are scared and it's not safe for them to tell what's really going on. So I looked at the fellow commander sergeant who was next to me, and I realized that there's a back officer there, lower rank than that one, but he was still there checking on us. And I realized that they too know what's going on, but they were silent. They probably knew what was going on even earlier than I did. So we decided, three of us, not me personally, but three of us decided to keep silent. And it was continuing for 2 more, I guess, hours, when you mentioned the nightmare. Then finally we went back to the camp. I talked to the second commander. I came to him. It was really a scary thing to do also, you know, to take the responsibility and say about what's going on. And what he told me was really surprising and shocking for me. He said, Vladimir, thank you very much for being honest. And thank you for telling this. He was really calm. He said, this is our responsibility, so don't worry about that. That was, by the way, a huge example of responsibility, because he said, I will take care of that, and he did. So the next time we met, we went to the field and we continued shooting. Everything was fixed, and we never got back to this situation. So I'm doing what I'm doing for more than 20 years. And I do understand that there are 3 things that should be all together for you to be successful in any area of your life, whatever you work. And those 3 things are, the first one is knowledge. You gotta know knowledge in the area that you are a professional in. That's why we go to the universities, that's why we take MBA courses. If you are in sales, you gotta be professional in sales and you gotta get the knowledge. If you are in finance, you gotta know the finance. If you are in marketing, for example, you gotta be good there. So knowledge is the first thing that should be at place. I have this example of driving a car. Everybody who remembers how he learned how to drive a car does remember that you first got some kind of knowledge, right? Whether it's a stick transmission or an automatic transmission, whether you have 2 pedals or 3 pedals, how, you know, the traffic rules and all that, they're different in different countries. But you gotta know that, otherwise you won't even step close to the car. I hope you won't step close to the car if you don't get the knowledge. Okay, then you get the knowledge, but you have to get the practice. So the second thing that should be in place is your skills. What is skills is something that you do automatically without even thinking about that, okay? So thing number 2 is skills, and if you will remember how you tried to drive your car in the beginning, it was terrible because you knew all the right things, but you couldn't put them in place together. Like pressing one pedal, taking the other with your left foot, and looking into the rear mirror and thinking this is the right moment to start, remember? And then you started, and then you get all those, especially if you begin to drive here in New York City, it's a nightmare because everybody hates you when you do that. So knowledge and skills are 2 things that are very necessary for you to be successful. But it's not enough, because the bottom line, the thing that really makes you successful is your attitude, okay? And attitude is something that is the area that I've been, you know, working in for many, many years. The attitude goes back to the story I told you in the beginning. We were good professionals. We know how to do things. We knew that something is wrong and how to fix it. But we didn't do it because of the attitude. And the attitude is the bottom line or the foundation of whatever is going on. So I had a new example right now, like an hour ago or a bit more than that. I took a drive here. I took a taxi. And the driver was sitting there, and you know, sometimes you got one of those drivers who talk a lot. So he was like talking a lot about everything is bad, the city is not like it was, it's not how it used to be, nobody get good food, everybody's driving like crazy and all that stuff. And he's actually, at the moment, is the one who's driving like crazy. And he's the one at the moment who's like, you know, going fast, brakes, then he goes right, then he goes left. And then he said how bad those guys are that, you know, are not allowing him to stand in this line. So actually what I should have tell him is, buddy, listen, you're the one with the bad attitude right now, okay? You're the one who's not responsible, or you are responsible for what's going on the road. So attitude is the main point and the foundation of all the results that you have. And I'll tell you a little bit about the mission of the company that I work for. It's creating results through organizational and employee transformation. That's what Ivan just said. It's not actually the business training about the skills and knowledge and how for you to do your business. And it's also not a training about how you should do something. It's about how things are, but in a personal level. I mean, not the personal like you as a person, but you as a human being, you as an individual. And when you transform something in your head, in your perception of what's going on, when this kind of transformation happens, then it influences the business. So this is, I think, the only way to do that. And there are two actually ways to do trainings and to do stuff. And I think that the way that we've chosen is a little bit different from most of the American types. Usually it's more entertaining, more lectural thing, more to empower you, to give you good energy, to give you good impression when you walk out of the training room, and then you say, yeah, I like it, it's good. But then it's still like more of the theories, like concepts that you have. And only when the transformation really takes place, when something is shifted inside, when you've got the shift in your thinking and your perception, then something actually is going on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Well, yeah, that's about me. Probably the only thing I was the winner of the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year 2015 in category B2B. That is exactly what I'm talking about. Let's do the next one. So this is the unique methodology, and these are the benefits. By the way, we're going to give you this thing at the end of this presentation, so you're going to keep all those slides and information there, and we can send it to you if you want it digital later. So it's actually about creating and support the cultural shift that will take place in the organization, and that is the most important part. Okay, the next one. So how do we do it? We call it the context, or we call it the environment. I like the word context a lot. So what is context? There are several definitions of the word context. One of the definitions is that context is a filter through which you look at things in your life. And if you're looking at some context, things look a certain way. If you're looking from a different context, they look differently. Like the guy who I was taking a ride with today in the morning, he was in a kind of negative context, victimized context. Everybody are jerks context, and I'm like the good guy here context, and I'm separated from all of them context, and I have nothing to do with that. And when you're looking in certain things in a certain context, it makes a huge difference. The other definition of the context is the culture in which people actually work. And if you shift your context, you shift actually everything that's going on in your organization. If you take a person from a good context or a good environment and you put him in a bad environment, he begins to work like in a bad environment people are working. And backwards, if you take somebody from the bad environment and put him in a good environment, he has a shift in his thinking and in his attitude. So we always live in the present. And why we live in the present as individuals or as organizations, we base what we do on the past. Okay? Why is that? Because this is how our mind is wired. It's wired to make the decisions based on the, what you already know. And on one hand, this is good because it protects us from doing something bad and terrible. And so that's good. But on the other hand, making decisions based on the past or based on the culture that you're in right now, it's bad because it limits you. And when you go to the future, and the future will happen anyway, the future will mostly look like the past. Okay? So if you really want to have something to happen in your organization, which is extraordinary future, then you got to make a shift in the context. You got to create a different context in which you live. So this is what we're doing. We're not talking about what kind of context you should have and be responsible and all that stuff, but we actually make this shift. So how do we do this shift in context? Once again, not by telling you how it should be, but by acknowledging what is right now. By acknowledging what kind of attitude, what kind of habits, mental habits, and like action habits do you have in your organization. And this is something what most of the trainer or some of the trainers are skipping. They're not looking at what's going on in the organization, like the guy that I told you today about, or the thing that I told you in my first story. You know, in order to change this, you have to admit it. And you also got to know that there are always two kind of cultures in any organization. Always, at the same time, two cultures. One culture is the culture which I would call formal culture, that they write about in the booklets. When you come to organization, they tell you this is the kind of culture we have, or we might have, or we want to have. And then you go in, and in a couple of days, maximum a week or two, you realize what is the real culture, what is the real context in the organization. And usually they are very distinct, they're very different, those two cultures. So most of the programs are focused on what the culture should be, what is the right way to create the culture. You know, good examples of big company, Apple most of the time and all that, and people are sitting and saying, okay, this is cool, I want it to be like Apple or Google or whatever. But then they come back to their own organization and they face what's really is going on there. But like I didn't admit it in my 19-year-old surgeon time, some people are not admitting what's going on there in the organization right now, because most of the people have to protect themselves, like I did like 30 years ago, from their organizations. Now listen, protect themselves from their organization because it's not safe. So if we create the environment of trust, and what is trust? Trust is when you can feel yourself safe in the organization. You know that human beings are social animals, everybody knows that. We used to live in groups. The only reason for that was to feel safe, to be protected. Now, oftentimes, you know, when you become the boss, you become offensive, you become, you know, dominating, and you create the atmosphere of fear and pressure and resistance. And oftentimes, this is what actually takes place in the organization, and people are not open enough and free enough to be themselves, to, you know, work fully and to participate and make all the effort they should make for the organization to be truly extraordinary. So can we just get back for one reason? The experience, the expertise is making individuals aware. That's what I said, of the context they operate within right now. And context is everywhere. You actually, you know, it is something that you can't feel. I mean, you can touch, but you can definitely feel it. And context is everywhere. When you go to business negotiation, you know, in a couple of minutes, you know what is the context of the person you're talking to. You can feel it in between the lines. It is something that you can definitely feel. So even though that you can't touch the context, it's still something that influences everything a lot. And there's another expression that is really strong. The context defines the content. Whatever the content is in your organization, whatever you do, if you don't set the right context, then you won't have the right results. For example, if it's a hot context, it's in the environment of the desert, or in North Pole, two different contexts. There is different content in which and another. Okay, if you take the polar bear and put it in the context of the desert, he won't survive there. So technology is good, ideas are good, money is good, everything is good, but it's all content. But if you don't have the right context, it will vanish once again. So personal responsibility, that's a huge part of the context, and choosing to change the context. This is, by the way, probably the number one thing. If you will leave this place and you will make some decisions, or you will act on something that you wouldn't be taking action if you wouldn't be here, that would be a great thing to do. If you will just choose to do something. If you're not the big CEO, or you're not responsible for the company, the whole company, you can be always responsible for the context and for the relationship with the person near you. You can always create a small context around you, and that would influence, people around you. So changing or choosing to change the context. Okay, let's go further. So how does context change everything from dysfunctional teams, conflict, lack of focus, poor communication, low performance and growth, toxic attitudes and low moral and engagement, to clear and effective working context, strong relationships, shared vision. This is important too. Now, I work in an organization for many, many years, and I know that it's rarely that you can meet someone in the organization who truly believes and shares the goals and the visions. If you want to be really honest, they're always the owners or sometimes the CEO or sometimes the managers, which tell you it wouldn't be bad if we'll have this and this or such and such results. But then you go down and people are playing their own games, people are doing their own things without even sharing or sometimes even knowing the goals of the organization. Or if they do know it, they share it formally, not freely. So to be engaged and share vision and mission and purpose, that is a very huge thing. Open communication, that what didn't take place in my first example. I couldn't make an open communication with my first commander, and then it happened with the second one. High engagement, personal responsibility, positive environment, peak performance, and extraordinary results. Okay, we go further. The technology of achieving extraordinary results. I have not too much time left. We do it usually in 3 steps. We have 3 courses, and every course takes 2 days. And so there's course 1, course 2, and course 3. One of them is about personal effectiveness. Okay, you can see it here. And we actually talk about the context that is at place. We talk about your beliefs, your ideas, your attitude, and how you personally influence the organization. The second course, it's about building relationship, is where we find out what actual games we play, how I affect the group, and then we move to the team. And there is a definition of a team which is unique and almost the same all over the world. I trained in many countries, in many places, and there's always one definition of a team. That a team is a group of people with shared goals and shared vision. On one hand, it's so, but if you will look from the team from the outside, that is a group of people. But if you look at the team from inside, it's only one individual with a certain attitude towards the rest of the guys, toward the team. And if you are missing this one person, then there is no team on both sides. If you have 11 players in a soccer team and one of them is not giving the all effort, then there's not a team. And when there's one guy or one person who takes the lead and takes responsibility, he can create the team by example. So I say that the team is not a group of people, but an individual effort, an individual attitude, and that's their responsibility. And that's a different perspective from what a team might look like. Okay, so we go next. I already said that the first course is about personal effectiveness, self-assessing professional capabilities, and increasing levels of productivity. And there is, of course, the introduction to the methodology, because it's kind of different from what people usually again. When you walk into the training room, people come there with their habits. As I said, mental habits and habits of acting a certain way, and the way they react to the trainer. And the trainer is an irrigation, or a stimul that provokes some kind of reaction. So the reaction that he provokes is actually the reaction that people always are showing in their work. So we got to know those reactions. We got to know how people connect to each other, how they respond to each other. And that's an interesting thing to reveal. Of course, they know that already because they're working in the organization for many years, but they're not talking about that usually. They're hiding it. So we pretend that we're not pretending while we are pretending, this kind of stuff in the organization. So you reveal all this pretending stuff. The second course is about building relationship together in a group. And there is a very serious, huge process that reveals actually all the relationships there. And the trainer really explains new interpretations. By the way, it's all we do is we talk about different interpretations. Any event that is taking place doesn't have a meaning inside unless you put on the meaning there. So you put on the meaning based on the context and based on the interpretations that you're in, and your interpretation divide your attitude and your reaction or proaction to what's going on. So it's the interpretation that makes a difference, and the interpretation arrives or comes with the context. Okay, and the third course is about creating a team, learning how to create a team. It's actually not about talking how to create a team, but experiencing other people as teams. So we work in some organizations that are together for 10 or 20 years, and they never experience themselves as a strong team before as they do after the third course. And that's really an unbelievable thing to see. You know, when people are working in huge companies. We recently did a training for a big company which is called Jet Smarter. You probably heard about the company. They're doing the app. It's similar to the Uber, but they're doing for the aviation flights. You can book a ticket for a jet for the price of the business class ticket. And the guy who created the company, actually, he's a genius. He has excellent ideas. The company is working for 5 years. But you know, it's the model, and that's like not the secret information. You can tell it. It's an open information on the internet. The model wasn't really working well, so they had to make a decision to make a shift. And they had all those, you know, good, smart people who came from Uber, from different companies, who were in charge of, you know, huge responsibilities, but they couldn't make the decision. More as a trainer, and you know, when I do things like that, I have to be more like in a lecture style. This is not the kind of thing that I really, you know, am a professional in. It's like a football coach would really lecture about something or actually coach a team. It's different things. So I'm basically, what I'm doing all day, every day, almost every day, is coaching people, not reading the lectures. So in today's world, companies have the access to the same resources, okay, money, people, technology, but what could really be a competitive advantage for the company is the context or the environment that you work in. And for order to make this shift, you got to make a decision to make the shift. You got to be honest about the culture, about the context that is actually here, about the real environment in your company. You got to talk about that. You got to create an open atmosphere, and you got to make this choice not only for yourself but for your people. And then taking responsibility and creating the right environment will make a huge shift. So of course you can use the tool of business relations, or you can do it yourself. And as I said, you can do it not only with the organization itself, the big organization, but you can do it in small steps in the area where you can actually influence, even if it's only another person in your relationship. That's still a big shift for me. Thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions for me, I will definitely be glad to answer those questions. Thank you very much. Looks like there is no question. Well, you know what? Maybe we can do it in a private way, like you will communicate. I think there's some coffee left or some croissants left. Thank you. Yeah, and we'll give away the presentations. If you can grab one and pass it to the other guys, I would appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you.